Maya's breath caught in her throat as she watched Jake Martinez lean over her laptop screen in the library, his finger tracing the words she'd written just hours before, words meant only for Elena, the mysterious tutor he'd been pouring his heart out to for weeks. The worn $20 bills crumpled in Maya's palm felt heavier than they should have. As she counted them for the third time, $43, not even enough for half her rent, let alone groceries for the week. She slumped against her dorm room wall, staring at the eviction notice taped to her door like a scarlet letter announcing her failures to anyone who passed by. That's when she saw the flyer, bright yellow paper with bold black letters promising easy money for tutoring services, anonymous online tutoring. It read, "Set your own rates, work your own hours, complete privacy guaranteed." Maya had always been good with literature, her professors constantly praising her analytical skills and writing ability. But the thought of tutoring face-to-face made her stomach churn. She was the girl who sat in the back corner of every classroom, who ate lunch alone while reading dog-eared paperbacks, who had perfected the art of being invisible, but anonymous. That changed everything. Within hours, she'd created her profile under the name Elena Vasquez, a sophisticated, confident literature tutor with years of experience. She crafted a persona of someone worldly and articulate, someone who could discuss Neruda's poetry with the passion of a true romantic, someone who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Everything Maya wished she could be but never dared to become. Her first client request came that same evening. Jake Martinez needed help with his contemporary literature course, specifically poetry, analysis, and creative writing. Maya knew Jake by reputation. Everyone on campus did. Star quarterback, communications major, the kind of guy who never lacked for company or confidence. She'd watched him from afar in their shared Victorian literature class, admiring how he always sat in the front row, how Professor Chen seemed to light up when Jake contributed to discussions about Bronte or Dickens. Their first session was supposed to be strictly business. Jake logged in at exactly 7 p.m., his username simple, JM_poet. Maya found herself staring at that username for a long moment. Poet? That seemed unlikely for someone like Jake Martinez. Elena. His message appeared on screen. "Thanks for taking me on such short notice. I really need help with this assignment." As Elena, Maya found herself typing with a confidence she'd never possessed in real life. "Of course, Jake. Tell me about the assignment and what's giving you trouble." What followed was a conversation that lasted 3 hours instead of the planned one. Jake wasn't struggling with basic comprehension or looking for someone to write his papers for him. He was wrestling with the deeper meanings, trying to understand how poets like Rumi and Whitman could make vulnerability feel like strength. He shared his own attempts at poetry, hesitant at first, then with growing enthusiasm as Elena encouraged him. His words were raw, honest, beautiful. Poems about pressure and expectations, about feeling like he was performing a role that didn't fit, about longing for something real in a world that felt increasingly artificial. Maya found herself completely absorbed, forgetting to maintain her professional distance as she responded with genuine emotion and insight. "You write like someone who's been carrying these feelings for a long time," she typed, her heart racing. As she hit send, "Maybe because I have been," Jake replied. "It's easier to write it than to say it out loud. Easier to tell a stranger than someone who thinks they already know who I am." Maya stared at those words until they blurred on her screen. She understood that feeling more than he could possibly know. The session ended with Jake thanking her profusely, scheduling another appointment for the following week, and leaving her with a generous tip that brought tears to her eyes. As she closed her laptop, Maya caught sight of her reflection in the dark window. For the first time in months, she was smiling. 3 weeks into their tutoring relationship, Maya had developed a dangerous habit. She found herself arriving early to Victorian literature class just to steal glances at Jake, searching for signs of the sensitive poet she'd been getting to know as Elena. The disconnect was jarring in class. He was all easy confidence and charming smiles, surrounded by friends who treated him like campus royalty. But she knew now that he stayed up late writing verses about feeling alone in crowded rooms, that he'd rather discuss metaphysical poetry than football statistics. that he had a scar on his shoulder from a childhood accident that he'd never told anyone about. Their online sessions had evolved far beyond academic tutoring. Jake had started opening up about his family's expectations, the pressure to maintain his perfect image, his secret dream of pursuing an MFA in creative writing after graduation. Maya, as Elena, shared her own insights about literature and life with a boldness that shocked her. She found herself crafting responses that were deeply personal, drawing from her own experiences of feeling invisible and misunderstood. "I've been thinking about what you said last week," Jake wrote during their Thursday session, "about how the best poetry comes from authentic emotion, not what we think people want to hear. What about it?" Elena replied, "I wrote something new. It's different from my usual stuff, more personal." Maya's pulse quickened as Jake shared his latest poem. It was about longing, about being drawn to someone you can't have, someone who exists just out of reach. The metaphors were sophisticated, the emotion palpable. But it was the last stanza that made her breath catch. She speaks in whispers I strain to hear. Her wisdom flows like morning light. If only I could draw her near. Make shadows real, bring dark to bright. Jake, she typed, her fingers trembling slightly. This is beautiful. Who inspired it? There was a long pause before his response appeared. My tutor, actually, you. I know it's probably inappropriate to say, but Elena, these conversations we have, they mean more to me than you probably realize. You see parts of me that no one else does. Sometimes I wish we could meet in person. Maya stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of and secretly hoping for. The line between professional and personal had been blurring for weeks, but now it had been crossed entirely. Jake, she began, then deleted the line, started again. I'm flattered, but you should know that the person you're talking to online might be very different from who I am. In real life, I doubt that. You can't fake the kind of understanding you have, the way you really listen. The real you is exactly who I'm talking to right now. If only he knew, Maya thought bitterly. If only he knew that the real her was the invisible girl who sat 3 rows behind him in Victorian Lit, who had never spoken a word to him despite sharing classes for an entire semester. The girl he probably wouldn't notice if she disappeared tomorrow. That night, Maya lay awake staring at the ceiling, Jake's poem echoing in her mind. She was falling for someone who was falling for a version of herself that only existed in cyberspace. It was a kind of beautiful tragedy that would have made perfect material for the Victorian novels. They studied in class that the next morning. She almost didn't go to literature class, but Professor Chen was discussing Jane Eyre, and Maya couldn't miss the irony of analyzing a story about hidden identities and impossible love, while living her own version of it. Jake was already in his usual front row seat when she arrived. As she settled into her back corner desk, he turned around, scanning the classroom. For one heart-stopping moment, his eyes met hers. Maya held her breath, waiting for some spark of recognition, some sign that he sensed the connection they shared. But Jake's gaze passed over her without pause, settling on a group of his friends who had just entered. He smiled and waved, and Maya felt the familiar sting of invisibility settle over her like a well-worn coat. During the lecture, Professor Chen read a passage about hidden truths and the courage it takes to reveal them. Bronte suggests that authentic love requires complete honesty, she said, that relationships built on deception, however well-intentioned, are ultimately doomed to failure. Maya slumped lower in her seat, the professor's words hitting close to home. She was living a lie, and with each passing day, it was becoming harder to maintain. But she was also terrified of losing the one genuine connection she'd ever felt, even if it was built on a foundation of deception. As class ended and students filed out, Maya lingered, pretending to organize her notes. Jake passed by her desk, close enough that she could smell his cologne, close enough to touch. He was talking to his friend about weekend plans, his voice carrying the easy confidence she knew was only part of his story. That evening, as she prepared for their scheduled tutoring session, Maya stared at her reflection in her laptop screen before logging in. Elena stared back at her, confident, articulate, everything Maya wanted to be, but felt she never could be in real life. When Jake's message appeared, "Elena, I've been looking forward to this all day," Maya realized she was standing at a crossroads. She could continue the charade, living vicariously through her online persona while her real self remained invisible. Or she could find the courage to bridge the gap between Elena and Maya, between the woman Jake was falling for and the woman she really was. Either choice terrified her. The moment Maya had been dreading finally arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, wrapped in the innocent request to meet Jake at the library for an in-person study session. He'd been growing more insistent about meeting Elena face to face, and she'd run out of believable excuses. So she'd agreed, planning to send a carefully crafted message about a last-minute emergency that would buy her more time to figure out how to handle the situation. She arrived at the library early, intending to find a secluded corner where she could compose her excuse message in peace. But as she rounded the corner to the literature section, she froze. There was Jake, hunched over a laptop at one of the study tables, completely absorbed in whatever was on his screen. Maya's heart stopped as she recognized the familiar interface of their tutoring platform. He was reading their conversation history, moving closer on silent feet. Maya watched in horror as Jake scrolled through weeks of their exchanges. But what made her blood run cold wasn't just that he was reading their private conversations. It was the document open in another tab. Her document. Her real writing samples from Professor Chen's class, complete with her name in the header, Maya Rodriguez, Victorian Literature Analysis. Jake's finger traced a particular paragraph about Bronte's use of Gothic elements, and Maya recognized it immediately. It was nearly identical to advice Elena had given him just 2 weeks ago, about incorporating atmospheric elements into his own poetry. Maya Rodriguez, Jake murmured to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. He minimized the tutoring platform and opened what appeared to be the class roster, scrolling until he found her name. Then he clicked on her student profile photo, the same shy, awkward picture she'd been trying to avoid him seeing for months. Maya watched the recognition dawn on his face, followed by something that looked like disappointment. Her chest tightened as she saw him close the laptop with more force than necessary. She should have left then, should have slipped away and figured out how to handle this crisis from the safety of her dorm room. Instead, she found herself stepping forward, her voice emerging as barely a whisper. "Jake." He looked up, and Maya saw her worst fears confirmed in his expression. The warmth that had characterized all of Elena's interactions with him was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was confusion, hurt, and something that might have been embarrassment. "You're Elena," he said. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded, unable to trust her voice. She slid into the chair across from him, her hands trembling as she placed them on the table. "Why?" The single word carried the weight of weeks of genuine connection, of vulnerability shared and trust given. "I needed the money," Maya began, then stopped. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. "And I was scared. I'm not the kind of person who can just talk to people like you. I'm invisible here, Jake, in class, on campus, everywhere. But as Elena, I could be someone different, someone confident and articulate and worth knowing." Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler but still guarded. "So our conversations, everything we talked about, that was all fake, no?" Maya's response came out louder than intended, earning disapproving looks from nearby students. She lowered her voice but kept the intensity. "That was the most real I've ever been with anyone. Every insight, every piece of advice, every moment of understanding, that was me. The real me. Elena was just the version of me that was brave enough to speak. But you let me think you were someone else. I told you things I've never told anyone, and you were sitting 3 rows behind me in class every day, knowing exactly who I was while I had no idea who you really were." The pain in his voice cut through Maya like a blade. She had hurt this person she cared about, this person who had trusted her with his most vulnerable thoughts and feelings. "I wanted to tell you," she said, tears threatening to spill over. "So many times I almost did. But I was terrified that if you knew the real me, the quiet, awkward girl who eats lunch alone and has never been to a party, you'd lose interest, that our connection would disappear." Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. And maybe he was, Maya thought. Maybe this was the first time he'd really looked at her as a person rather than just another face in the crowd. "You know what's funny?" he said finally. "I always noticed you in class. You were the one who actually paid attention to the lectures instead of scrolling through Instagram. You asked the smartest questions when Professor Chen opened the floor for discussion, which wasn't often, but when you did speak up, it was always insightful. I just never had the courage to talk to you." Maya blinked in surprise. "You noticed me?" "Of course I did. But you seemed, I don't know, like you had this invisible barrier around you. Like you didn't want to be bothered by someone like me. Someone like you. The stereotype. The jock who probably only cares about football and partying." Jake's laugh was bitter, which is exactly what I let everyone think, because it was easier than explaining that I'd rather spend Friday night reading Neruda than at some fraternity house. Maya stared at him, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "We were both hiding." "Yeah, I guess we were." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of revelation settling between them. Finally, Jake spoke again. "So where does this leave us? I mean, I can't pretend I don't feel connected to you, to Elena, to whoever you really are, but I also can't pretend that finding out this way doesn't hurt." Maya took a shaky breath. "I understand if you don't want to continue the tutoring sessions. I understand if you don't want anything to do with me at all. I know I broke your trust." "You did," Jake said simply. "But you also showed me parts of yourself that I never would have seen otherwise. The question is whether the real Maya, not Elena, not the invisible girl in the back of the class, but the complete, complicated person you actually are, wants to try building something honest." Maya met his eyes for the first time since sitting down. "I do, but I need you to know that I'm not Elena. I can't just flip a switch and become that confident person all the time. I'm still going to be awkward and shy and probably mess this up in a dozen different ways. And I'm still going to be someone who feels pressure to be perfect all the time, who's scared of disappointing people, who writes poetry he's afraid to show anyone." Jake's smile was tentative but real. "Maybe we can figure out how to be our real selves together." As Maya looked into Jake's eyes that had seen her, really seen her, maybe for the first time, she felt something shift inside her. The terror was still there, but underneath it was something stronger. "Hope. I'd like that," she said, and meant it. They left the library together that afternoon, not as Elena and Jake, but as Maya and Jake, two people who had found each other through deception, but might just build something real from honesty. It wouldn't be easy, and Maya knew they had a long way to go to rebuild the trust she'd damaged. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she might be worth the effort. For the readers, when someone you care about reveals they've been hiding their true identity, whether online or in person, while building a genuine emotional connection with you, can that relationship recover? Is it possible to have authentic feelings based on partial truths? And does the foundation of deception doom the relationship, or can honesty after the fact create something stronger? What would you do in Jake's position?